Hello, my name is Xenophon Papadimitris. I'm a professor in radiology and biomedical imaging and biomedical engineering at Yale. This interview is part of a collection of conversations with experts in medical software from academia, industry, and regulatory agencies, and is supplementary material for a Coursera class Introduction to Medical Software that will appear in the fall of 2021. Guest today is Mr. Michael Nilo. Mr. Nilo is a regulatory consultant and president of Nilo Medical Consulting Group, which focuses on helping medical devices companies navigate the regulatory process from concept to commercialization. He's a biomedical engineer by background, who spent the first part of his career working at the FDA on the pre-market review of dental and cardiovascular systems. In addition to his regulatory work, Michael teaches the senior biomedical engineering capstone course at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Michael, thank you for coming on and willing to take the time to talk to our students. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and your company and what we should know about you here?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Venios, and welcome to this class for everyone listening. My name is Michael Nilo, as mentioned, and I have my own medical device consulting company. We focus on helping companies, whether you're at the very beginning and you just have a concept, or you're already got products on the market, but helping navigate regulatory, especially within the FDA. Because of my background, I've worked at the FDA before and have connections within there to help and know a little bit about the inside process as we go through. We continue to help a wide variety of companies, and really the process through the FDA, especially with digital health, has been ever evolving and changing. So it's our goal to help companies get their ideas to the market and help their good ideas get to patients. So we've been successful over the last 5 years and hope to continue that.
So the first question any student asks, and I get lots of these questions from my students, is, okay, I have a cool idea. I figured something out. I know how to diagnose cancer from images. I want to start a company. Ultimately, I want what I do to go to patients. Where do I start? What do I need to know? How do I survive this regulatory process?
So one of the first things, it's a question I get asked all the time as a consultant as well. One of the first things you need to know is when you're coming to regulatory, you haven't done anything unless you've written it down. And most of you watching this are probably have taken math courses or physics courses throughout your background, and it's the show your work mentality. Regulatory agencies are really going to want to see that, and they're going to want to see the process as you've developed your devices from fairly early on at concept to the whole way out to, hey, here's our final software package. Some other things to know early, right when you start, is really define what your user needs are and what the problem you're trying to solve is. Almost all regulation kind of filters down from what's the problem you're trying to solve, what are the user needs, and how have you really set your specifications to meet those user needs. Because medical devices and medical software are so unique to the condition they are treating, there aren't necessarily standardized line for line ways to do this. It is up to the company, to define what those requirements are and how you're going to meet them. So that would be, right when you're starting, is just kind of make sure you know what problem you're trying to solve, what those user needs are, and design requirements around those user needs. Another point that I would say right when you start is have an eye on regulatory pathway to market early. You don't want to get too far down a road with an idea that just because of the nature of it is never going to be provable, that your claims that you want to make are never going to be something that was supportable. You want to make sure you have an eye on that early, although it doesn't need to be step one. It just needs to be early. Trust yourselves to have good ideas. The medical, the benefit always comes first. You can make the regulations work. It's just, you don't want to make it too hard. The last thing that I would say very early is the FDA, especially on, and that's, I'm focusing on the US here. The FDA, especially on the medical device, which is where software is regulated, is not your enemy. They are interactive and evolving and kind of catching up to technology that this, probably a little bit behind those of you watching this video, but they offer lots of ways to interact with them, ask questions, get as much information from them as possible as you go. So those would be my couple of pieces of advice. Within the FDA, especially the group with medical software you'll be working with, the way the kind of process works is the group there is filled with scientists, engineers, medical professionals, so nurses, doctors, people who often are still practicing and working within the FDA as well. You'll have statisticians, software computer scientists. So they recruit a wide variety of scientific and medical talent to work within the agency. Oftentimes it is people's first job out of grad school. Most of the people you'll interact with at the FDA have at least a master's or a PhD. It's for the non-medical people, so not the doctors or nurses, but the statisticians and scientists. Often it's a variety whether or not they've worked in industry. So sometimes as a company, there is a level of education you have to give the FDA on the way your particular company works. And then the way that a file works is it's your job as a company to present written evidence that supports your device will do what it's intended to do in a safe way. The FDA, different than Europe, the FDA doesn't come to, at this point in the process, in the pre-market part of it, does not come to your house to review all of your paperwork to make sure that you have the evidence. You need to put together a package that makes sense in almost a sales pitch of safe and effectiveness to the FDA. And then once it gets to the FDA, and these packages we'll talk about in a bit can be a variety of sizes, but once it gets to the FDA, they will review that information that you've given them, and they'll spread out the paperwork amongst the team of reviewers with one lead reviewer. So the clinician will likely review the clinical protocol, the clinical data, along with the statistician. A biocompatibility expert or a software expert will review your software validation, or usability. People who are specialists in usability and human factors engineering will review how you validated that your device does or your software does what it says it's supposed to do. So that's typically, and those timelines of how that review and how interactive it is really depends on how risky and what you're trying to say your software will do. So there's different processes for different levels of risk, but for the most part, once it goes in, don't feel like the FDA really has made an effort for a long time to make it on the software and device side, to make this not a black box. You have the opportunity to interact with your review team and try to solve problems during the review. And if it's a good product, the FDA will be looking to help you get it to market.
So I guess let's just zero in on a very practical question here. So I'm ready. I've talked to my consulting company. I've set up my file. I'm now ready to file. Mm-hmm. What happens now? So you more or less talked about it, but let's sort of recap it a little bit. What's step one? So the application is received. Now what?
So it's a good question, and we'll walk through the process. Is at this point you've submitted, like you said, the submission. What it is a very detailed description of your device, your software, what it looks like, how it works, and then along with all the evidence to prove that it works. So what kind of validation have you done? What kind of verification have you done? Once it goes in, on the company side, it'll first get assigned a lead reviewer. At the FDA, they'll communicate, hey, my name is Mike Nilo. I'm going to be reviewing, me and my team will be reviewing your software as a medical device. Then depending on the submission risk, so if it's class 2, it'll likely be what's called a 510K or a de novo, and we'll talk about that. Or if it's class 3, it'll be a PMA. And those review times will change, but essentially it goes into the review team, and you won't hear anything from the FDA for a set amount of time. unless there's interactive questions. And then after a certain amount of time, you'll likely start to hear from the FDA, and it'll be questions. This is after all the review team has come back together with their reviews. They'll be asking questions about, can you define your user, define your device better? How did you run this test? We have questions about this validation effort. We didn't see cybersecurity in your submission. Where is that testing? This level at this point, this should be expected. Do not freak out when the FDA asks you questions. The FDA, like we talked about before, it's a group of engineers and scientists. They are going to be curious about your device, your software, and also asking questions for them to know that you've proven what you say you can do. Oftentimes for companies, you think we've done everything, we proved this perfectly, but you've been working with the software for 5 years. That you may have done everything, but it might not be written in a way to communicate that well to the FDA. So you'll get questions. This will usually stop their review clock while you prepare responses to their written questions. Once you're able to respond to them, there might be a meeting with the FDA. It isn't required, but there's ways to do meetings with the FDA through the Q submission process. But once you respond back to them with all your written responses, the clock will start again, and the FDA will continue their review until a decision is made. So typically for 510Ks, on the FDA's review side, there is a 90-day clock. So that first review by the FDA might be 50 to 60 days. They'll send it back to you and pause the clock. And then you have 6 months, and right now, because of COVID, a year to respond to the FDA with those questions. Normally, it doesn't take anywhere near this long. You'll likely respond within a month. Once you respond, the FDA's time will continue, and they'll have 30 days left. If they use 60 on the front end, they'll have the 30 days left, or vice versa. If they had 30 on the first end, they'll have 60 days left. So that's the typical process for what goes on in-house. On that, while it's at the FDA, as a company, what you should be doing while the device is under review is really shoring up your quality management system to make sure that it's in better shape. Because for Class 2 products, which most medical software falls under, a full quality management system is not required until commercialization. So until after you get that clearance from the FDA to market your product. So, and you guys will have lectures or another person, a better expert, come in and talk about quality systems and what those look like. But you should have the framework for it early on, but really start to finalize it. The best time as a consultant, best time I tell my clients to start really finalizing it while it's under review, because you've got a gap here while the FDA reviews things. And that way, when you're ready for commercialization, you also have your quality system ready to go, which is a requirement at that point too.
So I had a lot of words that somebody new to this will have questions about, and so let's work a little bit. Use the word Class 2, and as you know, that's the risk classification. What does that mean? And
sorry, I jumped into probably a little too advanced right away. So medical devices, and like I said, software is regulated as a medical device, are broken in the United States, are broken into 3 classes, and those are based on risk. Class 1 is low risk products, and the typical example are tongue depressors or gloves or drapes and gowns, but there's lots of Class 1 products. Class 2 products are your moderate risk level products, and this is the majority of medical devices. Our Class 1 and Class 2 combined, I think, make up 90% of medical devices in the United States. But moderate risk devices can be as intense or as risky as knee implants, but are introductory catheters or balloon catheters for cardiovascular implications. They also are, if you have during COVID right now, this comes up, If you have a face mask that has antimicrobial properties on it, the antimicrobial part makes it a class 2 product. And there's all sorts of things in between that fall into class 2. So that's, and those, when I say class 2, that's moderate risk, and that's the typical process. And there's, and then those fall under class 2 products. And then class 3 is high risk. And high risks are going to be, as you might assume, you know, your cardiovascular stents, a deep brain stimulator, peripheral nerve stimulators for things like incontinence or pain. And anything, you know, anything you would consider very high risk is going to be a class 3. And for each of those classes, there's different regulatory rules and controls based on them. And then I can get real quickly into that. For class, do you want me to?
So, I mean, yes, if people start reading the literature, they would hear words like general controls, special controls, PMA. What do these ultimately imply? So for different risk classes, there are different controls. I assume those are procedures that you have to follow as part of the design and manufacture. What do these things really mean concretely? And how does it affect how you do things, right? Because sure, the quality management system doesn't need to be in place until the end. I assume that's the whole quality system, but some of this needs to be in place at the start. And part of that is this control process, the design controls here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned so outside of the 3 things with general controls, special controls, and the PMA, the first thing you need to know is the FDA's rules for design controls are Code 21 CFR 820. That's in the Code of Federal Regulations. It is not the greatest thing to read, but you should know that 820 is where these design controls are found. And within the design controls, this is what I talked about at the beginning. You setting up your user needs, setting up your design inputs, your verification, validation, risk management, design outputs. Those are all defined within this regulation. And to successfully have a device that meets the requirements, you'll need to have these kind of systems, those requirements put together in a pretty organized fashion, because all of that fills into the submission you need to go to the FDA with. And so it's very good to have that work documented and set up early, especially when it comes to the requirements. Software as an industry iterates so quickly that it's very easy to blow by these requirements and just get to the product without documenting anything, or not documenting the iterative change. And it's very important to set a start date of, hey, this is when we have our version 1, and document how you're meeting as you go. And that's kind of falls into the design controls. Now, the level of evidence required at the FDA will differ by risk. So class 1 is required to meet general controls. And typically this, in a practical matter, this means that you're labeling your product correctly to say what it does, what it needs to do. You're tracking reports. So if you have a system to do that. So if your software is out there and someone says this doesn't work, your company needs to have a system to log that and address it. If there's adverse events associated with those problems, you need to have a system that says we're going to report that correctly to the FDA. The other general controls are often related to, not always, but often related to good manufacturing processes, which good manufacturing processes means that you have essentially are manufacturing or producing, coding your software under a set quality system process that will monitor that changes and CAPAs, corrective actions that are necessary, are monitored and done in a way that you can tell if the change still meet your product after the change does what it's supposed to do. And those are typically the only general controls. They also require following the FDA's rules of registering and listing. So registering your company with the FDA, listing that you're selling the product. You can't just be out there selling a medical device or medical software without paying the registration fee and telling the FDA they're selling it. Then when you move to class 2, there are what's called special controls. And special controls are often specific requirements for the indications for your device. So if you've got software that's related to diagnosing cancer, diagnosing cancer based on images of the calf, you're looking for sarcoma. I don't know why I picked that, but you're looking at that. There will be specific testing requirements of how to validate or how to verify that your device is doing what it says it does. And those special controls are typically defined in FDA guidances, international standards, or FDA things that the FDA has put out, or predicate devices. So previous devices in the same field that have been cleared by the FDA, you can look to those devices and see what they had to do to get through the FDA. And that's typically a good way to know what the requirements, the special controls for you will be at the class 2 level. Mm-hmm. The class 3 level is often, to get through at class 3, you need what's called a pre-market authorization, which is called a PMA. So that's why PMA is there. And the requirements there are you need to prove individually that your device is safe and effective. And this, for class 3 products, this often involves a clinical trial and the full suite of software validation, verification, human factors, cybersecurity, proper labeling. It's basically everything from class 1 to class 2, plus the clinical evidence to demonstrate on its own, not compared to anyone else's, that your device works in a safe and effective way, in a statistically safe and effective way as well. This is the highest level of control. Additionally, for class 3 products, the QMS system is required, the quality management system is required to be in place prior to submission, because part of the pre-market review will be that the FDA will come to your door and knock and say, hi, we're here to audit you to make sure you have all of these procedures in place. Yeah.
I guess you've mentioned also a few more terms that I want to circle back to. So for class 2, the pathways are sort of 510K, and you used the word predicate, so it'd be good to hear about that. And then there's sort of a Novo process for class 2. For class 3, the process again is labeled as PMA, presumably it's the same PMA that we've heard before.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So before I jump into how to do that, just because I haven't explained it yet, for 510K, for class 2 products, the normal process is called a 510K. And the reason it's called that is it's part of the Code of Federal Regulations. They were not very creative when they named this thing. But what you have to do, the level of evidence, is proving substantial equivalence to a product that's already on the market. So that's the bar. The FDA assumes, okay, well, we've already cleared one product and it's not out there hurting someone. So if you can show that you are similar and substantially equivalent in intended use and evidence to support your safety and effectiveness, then we'll let you be on the market as well.
So let's just bring in here. So practically speaking, if we go back to a previous algorithm for detecting some form of cancer, you have a set of images, you compare your performance against them, and you say we're doing about the same.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly what you do. Our evidence shows that we detect it as well or better than what's already out there. We have the evidence that users know how to use it, which is key for software that a lot of people miss, is that your code might be great, but if a doctor has the interface in his hand or her hand, and they look at it and they have no idea how to interpret the results, or they don't know how to use it to get to the results, then you also need to prove that end. So those are you'll be looking at that. And if you can show that you're equivalent, and there are good flowcharts and decisions from the FDA on the 510K process and how they make their decisions. So I encourage you to look that up, as whoever's listening. But once you're able to demonstrate that, then you get what's called a clearance. And FDA, if you're out there in the world and you see FDA cleared, that means it's a class 2 product and they've demonstrated substantial equivalence to something else. If you see FDA approved, that's for those class 3 PMAs because it's a pre-market approval. So that if you're just in industry and you're looking around at products and you see other people's claims, that's how to differentiate what process they went through the FDA. And then you mentioned de novo. So de novo process is for a class 2 risk product that there isn't a predicate out there. So let's say we'll use the imaging we just, I used as an example. If there was never a software that was used to diagnose sarcoma out there and there was nothing to compare it against, then you would need to use the de novo process, which is kind of the in-between between the 510K and the PMA, because it's good, since it's going to be on its own, the first one, you need to show on your own, you're not comparing it to anyone else, that this device works and works well in a safe and effective manner. But the controls in terms of that quality management system requirement that we talked about is still in the class 2 bucket. So you don't need to have it fully in place until after approval, because de novo will get you a class 2 or technically a class 1, but that doesn't happen very often, class 2 approval. And then once you have a de novo clearance though, the next company behind you can come up and use your device as a 510K. So as a de novo, though, the other thing is you get to set the special controls that we talked about. Whatever evidence you put forward and think is really important to demonstrate substantial equivalence or safety and effectiveness, you can set as your own special controls so the next group coming behind you, or even your next product as an iteration, will need to meet those requirements.
So it's kind of interesting. It's almost like you set the precedent in a legal sense for the next set of devices.
De novos are the snow plows. You clear all the snow. It does make it a lot. It's not easy, but it's easier as the next car behind the snow plow to get through the FDA.
Okay. So when people come to you, thanks. This is all very helpful. Mm-hmm. What are the most common misconceptions that you've heard?
The number one thing that I kind of hear often is the FDA is evil. They're against us. They're holding everything back. It's, their job is to make sure that we don't make money. You hear a lot of that, and that's just really not the case. The FDA is filled with people with, their job is to both protect and encourage public health, and they take that mission pretty seriously. A lot of times the onus is on the company to really show that to people who don't work for their company, that this product works in a way that makes sense on a scientific level. So it's almost a different type of marketing. You're marketing your product as safe and effective, not the shiniest new toy that you market as to make money. You're marketing it to scientists and regulators. So you need to produce the right amount of evidence and tell the good story that shows this works and this is going to be helpful to people. And that is really compelling to the FDA. They're not evil. They really do like to work with companies to help these things get through. The process isn't easy because it's not meant to be. These are, a lot of these things are going to affect people's lives, hopefully in a much better way, but you also don't want to sell the FDA wants to prevent companies from selling snake oil, or prevent companies, even more importantly, from selling something that could hurt them. And so that's I think that's the biggest misconception, is that they're out to get you. Other misconceptions are, especially in the digital health world, is what's the best way to say this? We're not medical, because in different ways of saying, and there are regulations that do support this sometimes, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions of people saying, well, we only do this, to a certain level, but I mean, at the end of the day, if you are something that is really helping therapy or diagnostics of a disease or a condition, you need to have a regulatory strategy. At least it may end up that that regulatory justification ends up, okay, we don't need to go to the FDA, but you can't ignore it entirely and pretend it's not there because someone else is ignoring it. Digital health is the FDA is catching up, but it is still a little bit of the Wild West in terms of how well it's regulated and how much it's in there. So comparing yourself to other apps or things like that that you see on the market is not always the most legal, regulatory speaking, way to process. You really should have your own strategy, develop it, justify it. And if it ends up that you don't need to go to the FDA because of that, that's fine. But make sure that that's documented, because the worst that could happen is the FDA comes, knocks on your door and says, no, you need to come to us and you've been doing this illegally. And if you don't have a reason why you thought you were okay available to them, you can get in trouble.
Okay, so a couple last questions. As we've been going for a while, I don't want to keep you here forever. But so you mentioned here the digital health and the mobile apps. There's obviously not all the software that gets used in this domain, in the medical domain, needs approval. Where is that line? How does one determine that line? Where is it? And I'm sure that line is going to shift, right? That line is probably fuzzy right now.
It's a really good question, and it's something that I get asked and we deal with pretty, constantly, to be honest, with digital health. The FDA has put out several guidances, and also the 21st Century Cures Act also had information regarding this. And there isn't really a clear-cut line, but there are guidances such as, and I'm going to name these for the listeners. A lot of medical device software only are what are called clinical decision support applications. And within that definition, there are, FDA says these are three things. They're non-medical device. They are medical device that we the FDA are not going to enforce the regulation requirements because they're too low risk or they're too common enough to worry about. The doctors are still handling all this, and we don't need to worry about the FDA doesn't need to worry about regulating them. Or there's clinical decision support applications that are regulated, and you need to go through the class 1 or class 2, class 3 process associated with it. Similarly, there's a general wellness, and this is a lot of current on the App Store. You figure, a lot of your fitness trackers and things like that fall under, or sleep trackers fall under general wellness. And there's a guidance that's related to that and provides a lot of good examples of functions that are general wellness and not regulated by the FDA. They're going to say, while they might seem like health-related applications, the FDA is kind of going, you know what, this is not a treatment or mitigation or something for a disease or condition. We're going to step back and say this is just promoting good health for the users. So those two guidances are really probably the best place to start for determining whether you've got something that needs to be regulated or something that is not regulated. After reviewing those and kind of writing a justification, that's where I would definitely consider talking to someone with experience, consultants such as our group or anyone you have reference to, that once you put together your own justification, check that with someone with digital health experience, FDA, because that line, like you mentioned, has been fuzzy and sometimes gets clearer and then sometimes gets fuzzier again as software becomes more sophisticated, especially with machine learning, becomes more sophisticated. And the FDA will always, and regulation in general, not just medical devices, but think EPA and everything like that, will always be a little bit behind the cutting edge. They can't make laws about something that hasn't come out yet. So I think you should be prepared for that. And as a digital health company, you need to have someone who is going to be monitoring those changes, at least on an occasional basis, so that you don't, something that was true in 2020 might not be true in 2024. And you don't want to have your company be in trouble because of that shift.
One of the other misconceptions, I guess, out there to me is, of course, people think that if it's not regulated, you're still not liable. There's still liability issues, right? You're putting a product out there. If that causes harm to people, whether this is classified as a medical device and you need regulation, you still need to demonstrate that you were doing it the right way, the proper way, because that's the other regulation we have in this country, right? There is the official regulation, but there's the unofficial. Is it unofficial? The soft regulation through the courts, effectively, correct?
Yeah. You're completely correct. And because of that, those design controls that we mentioned earlier are just very important for developing software, because it'll put together the evidence in an organized way, that if those questions ever come up, you can kind of immediately put it out there to say, well, we did our due diligence. And it's, it's set up in a way that's theirs. So, any new company really should start and finish and continue to maintain those design controls. To me, I don't know if it's the engineer in me, but I find that that's just good product development, whether it's a shovel for the snow or it's a software that's designed to, help people maintain their diabetes medication. I think either way, you should be maintaining those kind of knowledge of the user needs and evidence that proves that you're meeting them.
Right, because one day that product may change category and you may need to generate that fairly quickly at that point.
Yeah, that's another reason too. But I think the main reason is what you said. Is protecting both the patients that are going to use it, protecting the users, but also protecting yourself. It's a cover your own butt way to document things, because if someone ever asks questions or does try to sue because something happened, you want to have that evidence readily available and not be trying to scramble to make it up.
A question my students often ask: does the FDA look at your code? Do they actually run your software, or is it all a paper review based on the evidence you provide? How does that actually?
FDA does not typically review your code. They are going to review your verification validation processes and your traceability for that. If you change something, what task and what task changed and how did you verify that aspect of the code? But they're not going to dive into your code. Some of the reviewers may ask for it. They don't need to know your code. A lot of time, what's more important is the proof that it works. So what are the inputs? What are the outputs? Do the outputs meet the requirements? So that's going to be the focus. And the FDA does have really kind of prescriptive guidance on how to present them your software verification and validation. I think the guidance came out in 2019. So it's relative for the FDA, it's relatively recent. And it's a good one to follow if you're a company putting this together and you're ready to go to the FDA. Make sure that you've reviewed that one. The FDA won't review your code, but they will review your requirements and how you've defined your code. The other two big things for software evidence are going to be the human factors, the usability, and I mentioned that earlier, and the cybersecurity. Those three items, when most of the laws are written for a screw, like a dental implant, when you're looking at these things. So they're, a typical non-software will have mechanical testing, biocompatibility, electrical, all those sort of things. With software, there's only those three main things that they can look at to show that your device works. And you really should make sure that you're looking at the guidances and doing a full job of your software verification, validation, your human factors, usability, verification, validation, and your cybersecurity as well. So those would be the three things I would focus on if you're getting ready to go to the FDA, regardless of class level.
Okay. Is there anything else? I think we've gone for a while. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else you want to say before we close? Is there anything else that strikes you?
don't be, I think the big thing is just don't be afraid of the FDA, and remember that if you didn't document it, it doesn't exist. So make sure that you are writing your things down and you have a system that helps you do that.
Okay. Michael, thank you for taking the time. Look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Absolutely.